Previously on agentpalmer.com, a look at Adult Swim's Primal, a book review of Wonder Boys, and I'm still working to mend Tristan's broken heart. This is the Palmer Files, episode 6, with guest Carl Landra, where we talk about changing careers, an engineering cult, and then I go on my first real rant of this entire podcast. Let's do the show. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this episode is someone who recently made a career change on his own terms, Carl Landra. Change isn't something that comes easy to us as human beings, but it happens, and how we deal with that change and what kind of control we have over it determines our situations. For example, both Carl and I changed jobs after being in them for 8 years, and you'll hear about our different circumstances and how we dealt with those changes. But changes aren't just for careers. Changes happen all the time. For example, my good friend Bill Sweeney, the first guest on this podcast, has just relaunched his show, The Wicked Theory Podcast. It's now more of a comedic tete-a-tete. He has lighthearted conversations with his guests and plays games with them, from the Wicked Theory Classic Lightning Round to new games like Wordulary and What's the Scenario, plus new bits that are sure to become classics or forgotten. Wicked Theory is now releasing every 2 weeks on the off week of this very show, so every other week you can alternate between the Palmer Files and the Wicked Theory Podcast, and I hope you do. In fact, during this episode, I mentioned that the Wicked Theory Podcast was on hiatus. It was when we recorded, but now it isn't. That's a change. And that was a baked-in ad read for the Wicked Theory Podcast. That was a change. Maybe there'll be ads that aren't just trade. That would be a nice change. But this episode isn't just about change. It's also about decision-making, engineering, job searching, math, science, helping others, teaching, and what we want to be when we grow up. Before we get into the episode proper, you can hear Carl on his show, The Fourth Line Podcast, the greatest hockey podcast in all the land, and follow them on Twitter at Fourth Line Podcast. That's at the number 4 TH Line Podcast. You can also tweet this show at The Palmer Files, me at Agent Palmer, and of course, all of these links and those mentioned in the show will be in the show notes. So, without further ado, let's drop the puck and start the conversation. Carl, you more recently than not decided to change careers. I'm extremely interested in the fact that you got to do this on your terms, because back in February of this year, I was let go of my job of 8 years, and I have, for the last 8 months, been searching for my next career. So it hasn't really been on my terms. And I'm fascinated by the idea that you had a career and decided to make a change on your own terms. So, I mean, first and foremost, let's start with what the first career was, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, let's do it.
So you were an engineer.
I was an engineer for what amounted to 9 years.
And that's obviously you went to school for that. You were trained in that.
Yeah, I went to University of Calgary, got an engineering degree, spent 4 years doing that, worked 8 years before I changed my mind, and we can get into that. We'll get into all that, but
yeah,
8 years full time.
Why engineering? Like what was the why was that first? Like, I mean, when you were a kid, did you always want to be an engineer? Was it
when I was a kid? I always wanted to be something in science. Like I was thinking back recently to when I was in probably the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and thinking about. I said that I wanted to be a DNA scientist, and that was what I literally said. And I think 95% of it was just because, what the acronym stood for is a big word, and I knew what it was, and I was just bragging about a word I knew.
I can with the exception that I didn't have the grades to go to college or university for this, I always said I wanted to be an aerospace engineer because it sounded cool.
Right.
Like I, and then I got to a certain point and I was never going to be good enough in science or math to actually become an aerospace engineer. But I'm with you. Like there are those things when you're younger that just sound so cool.
Yeah. And that was mine. And so I had that realm of it. Um, but a big part of it was that I would say, I don't know how much, because there was never just a moment that I like actually sat down and thought, do I want to be an engineer? What do I want to be? And it was just kind of something that was in my head. And I know my mom, she told me, she was like, since you were 5 years old, I knew you were going to be an engineer. My dad was an engineer. And actually, every single member of my family started their university career in engineering. So my mom and sister both were in it, left, and then me and my dad finished. And so part of it was just like, looking back, I think that was just part of like, that was what I was going to be. I never really thought about it. I never, in all honesty, never really, had all that much thought as a kid of what it meant to be an engineer. Obviously, as I got closer to university, I was like, yeah, this is a cool thing. Designing things, building things, being a part of that was something that I was very into. To be able to like take the stuff that I loved about math and science, which were my like educational loves, and use that on the other side was a big deal and something that I was really excited to do.
So I probably would have been your best friend in like grade 4, 5, 6, and 7, maybe even 8, right? And then I had an English teacher in ninth grade or grade 9, and everything changed on one English teacher. And like, I stopped being the math science centric guy and started being the basically liberal arts guy that I became. And it all hinges on this one teacher. I don't know, maybe I would have stuck it out with math and science otherwise, but like, did you have any like, I mean, I know other people that were like math science people and then something happened and they switched, but like, you stuck through it, like, obviously. Was there ever any temptation to, I don't know, move away from math and science?
Not really. There was like there was a brief time in high school that I was wanting to take. I was debating like maybe I'd become a lawyer. Like that could be a cool thing. And so I took legal studies as an elective in high school. And it was the most boring class I have ever taken in my entire life. And I'm like, I don't want to have to sit here and like go through case law and all this stuff. I'm like, this is terrible. This is the worst thing I could have ever imagined. And so that it was that idea was done. And actually, I did think another one that came across my head at the time was being a teacher. And I thought to myself, I was not at the point in time that I was mature enough to be able to handle, to have the patience for teaching.
Spoiler alert, that's what you are now, right?
Yeah,
Like, okay.
irony is a real thing.
I want to talk to you about engineering in college, but I want to give you the only thing I know, or my parents both went to Lehigh University. That's where they met. And at the time, Lehigh were the engineers. They were the Lehigh Engineers. They've since rebranded to the Lehigh Mountain Hawks, but they were the Lehigh Engineers. Both of my parents went there, neither as engineering majors.
Fair.
It's
did they go there as Mountain Hawk majors? Is that what they went as?
Yeah, no. Philosophy. I mean, listen, in becoming a liberal arts major, I really just followed the family. I went to a smaller school. But all I knew about engineers were that they were smart in math. This is literally all I knew about engineers, right? Like,
well, and that's the like the stereotype, right? Like you say,
yeah,
someone finds out you're an engineer, oh, you must be good at math. Like,
it's funny because I know first of all, I know there's also science to it. And I also know that there's design and art to it as well. But in my head back then, that was architecture, which is not engineering by any stretch.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, to jump ahead real quick, you are an engineer. We talked about a couple of them, but like, what are like the biggest misconceptions of engineering?
I would say at least what I did, because I also did like a weird, not a weird, a rarely. There weren't a lot of people who did what I do, and so I actually worked at a software company. I was a chemical engineer working at a software company, and we made the software that other engineers use to design things.
Okay.
And so in doing that, I would say I was the only person that I went to school with who actually used the stuff we learned at school. Because most of them would design something, use our software, and design it to the specs that they needed. Whereas I was taking it down to like the principles, the bare bones of like, here's how it works. I was writing the equations that you would do for everything else.
Are we talking about like Goodwill Hunting equations? Like half a blackboard equations?
Some of them were big, yeah. Because
Okay.
I had multiple hats that I would wear throughout my time there, but the most of it, and the stuff that I'm the proudest of what I did there, was in thermodynamics. And so those had some pretty big equations that luckily someone else would usually derive for me. I would just repurpose an equation that someone else had already researched, studied, written many papers about, named it after themselves, and I would use that.
All right. So real quick, in the simplest terms, what is if I can say it, what is thermodynamics?
So, in the way that I used it, thermodynamics is explaining how chemicals would interact with each other and what you would get out of it. So, if I have, a bunch of methane, water, carbon dioxide at a certain temperature and pressure, what am I going to get? What's its density going to be like? How much is going to be a liquid? How much is going to be a gas? What are its other properties? What's its viscosity going to be for both of those phases? And so that was my job. A lot of it was just data fitting. A lot of it was once those big equations were implemented in the software, it was a lot of data fitting and making sure that you match research data.
All right. So going back into your education in your university years, are you chemical engineering straight from the get-go, or are you engineering and I'm not sure which field of study I'm within engineering you're going to be?
I was started with the full intentions of chemical engineering. I did have a brief time where I was like, maybe I want to be a mechanical engineer, but I stopped that. Which is interesting because a lot of the chemical or mechanical engineers I know uh, are actually doing the stuff that we did as chemical engineers, at least here in Calgary and in Alberta. And so, really, in the end, I could have ended up in the same places. Um, I guess I could have ended up in their places. I'm not sure I would have taken my same path, but in the end, it's all about kind of where you end up, where you work, the experience you get, and things like that. But here in Alberta, it's a lot of similar work done by both of them.
So you ended up with a software job, but like what other, I don't know, are there any like prototypical chemical engineering jobs where you can, use your education in a practical manner? Or is it, you can do almost anything?
So I did software here in Alberta. Most people end up in the oil and gas industry, and so you're working at either piping, so maybe pipeline design. Maybe you're working on refineries. Maybe you're whether it be building new ones or upgrading old ones to run more efficiently, more environmentally friendly. Those are kind of your stereotypical ways that you're ending up, and you can from there you branch out all kinds of things, right? Safety, uh, the business side of it, kind of depending on where you go, you start small and you end up all over the place. So
All right. While we're still talking about engineering, because I did read this in an article recently, what is the ritual of the calling of an engineer?
So it is one of the weirdest things you could ever and have the honor to be a part of. It is the most cultish, non-cult based thing I have ever ever been a part of. And actually, and this is what makes it cultish, I'm actually not allowed to talk about it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to,
All right.
but I'm part of it is like, hey, what happens in here? Like they shut the big doors in the conference room that it's in. Like they book out like the big convention center in Calgary, and they like shut the doors, and they're like, all right, cameras away.
And this is for twofold. One, does it matter what kind of an engineer you are? And two, does it happen outside of your country?
So this is a Canadian thing.
Okay.
And actually they called in the efforts of Rudyard Kipling to write the actual script that's used for it. So they're like, you know what, we need some big guns. He's gonna come in and write it. So so he wrote it. Unfortunately, it's nothing like the Jungle Book. I wish it was. But essentially, it's like you take an oath to hold yourself to the standard of an engineer. And so, you know, as part of this, you they say a bunch of things, you repeat it back, but you're doing this all while holding a chain that's the size of the chain that would be like on a yacht's anchor. Not even a cruise ship. Like it is huge.
Like the actual chain, not just one link.
No, it is because through this convention center hallway, they have run this chain, and so it is. You are all holding this same chain, and I might be misremembering the exact size. It was quite beefy. It was at least like, you know, I would say 4-inch diameter links on there. So you're all holding it on one hand and saying your thing on the other with, and it goes on. So then you get your iron ring. This is all part of your iron ring ceremony. And the iron ring goes on the pinky of your writing hand, and it's to help you remember this oath that you've taken.
So in the article, it came up because this is, I could be misremembering some of the article, but the oath and the way it came about was because there was a bridge that they were building out east between maybe Quebec and Newfoundland, or
it would have been New Brunswick, I think, is where.
Okay.
And it was the Quebec Bridge.
Okay, so and so from down here in the States, it's a very nationalistic view of engineering. Like we need to shape up. We're gonna make a Hippocratic oath of sorts for our engineers because we want to hold them on a similar level to uphold certain standards, just as we would want in the medical profession.
Yeah, well, and actually, the engineering system in Canada and the States are actually quite different from the schooling side of it. Because in Canada, all engineering schools, and I think we're much smaller. I want to say there's 10 or 11 schools that offer engineering degrees. Could be wrong on that number, don't quote me. But they're all like pre-certified. So if you want an engineering program at your school, you need to like show that you meet the standards of what is there. Which means when we finish, we're ready, and there's, you know, you have to do work and you have to do those things to get like a professional designation.
Yep.
But from that side, education wise, you're ready. In the States, schools don't require that, and you have to take like a knowledge exam afterwards to become certified. And so from that side, that's a little bit different.
It sounds like when you're done, you, from north of the border, are eminently more qualified to start work after graduation than the rest of us.
No, I don't think that that's the case. I think depending on, I think it's more consistent. So if you have an engineering degree, you are ready. Whereas, like, I think the way that would work is, you know, if you went to, I don't know, I won't disparage any particular school.
Fair enough. But if you went to a school down here, there's a chance you would have to take that additional test.
You would have to take that additional test no matter what school you went to.
Right.
So you go to MIT, you're taking that test. If you go to a school that's qualified, that's good, that's smart, you're gonna crush it, right? It's
Yeah.
not an issue. You're still going to study for it. Same thing. We do have to take an ethics exam after we finish our university as well. Again, I take it, I studied, I passed it. I'm ethical. Good way to go. But so that's kind of the difference, is that every engineering school in Canada is kind of similar.
Okay.
That they're kind of at that same place. So it makes sense that there's a more unified every engineer. If you see a pinky ring on just a plain steel pinky ring on almost anyone in Canada, the question is, are you an engineer?
Okay. And I mean, we could talk about it. You're not an engineer anymore. So did you have to give it back?
So actually, that's the thing that I've been getting some email correspondence with the Professional Designation Association. And there are some things that you do have to send back. You are not supposed to wear the ring
Okay.
if you're not practicing as an engineer, which, according to them, apparently they still wanted my money for a professional thing. And I'm like, look, you're not getting it. Stop asking for my money. But no, the ring. The thing is, the ring costs $20. Like it's an actual, like, it's the most basic steel ring you can find. But no, I do still have it. I don't wear it. Actually, I'm not sure how much, but my wife has been wearing it, but not on her pinky.
Okay.
We don't have the same size hands.
All right. So nobody's going to mistake her for an engineer because she's not wearing it on the pinky. That's where the engineers wear it.
That's where the engineers wear it. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit. You're a teacher now, and I know from following you on Twitter, as I do, you kind of made like an announcement on social media at one point that you were considering changing careers. I remember seeing you tweet or something about it, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe I just don't pay that much attention, but I wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden, Carl's a teacher now.
All of a sudden, there it is. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Those that live with me day to day absolutely would know. It is a weird thing to, like, I don't know. I could have been more public and talk about it. I also was at the same time moving into a public profession, trying to do less online. So I don't talk about I privatized the old Twitter profile. Not that there's anything on there I'm ashamed of, but it's just one of those things. So,
well, it's I know on my mother's side we're a family of teachers, and I know that my aunt, for example, who's a retired, she's gonna listen to this. I'm gonna get this wrong. I think she's a retired English professor. I know she doesn't really have those social media things. And obviously, I understand why you want the distance. But where's the idea come from to just change professions? And obviously, it's not just as simple as, all right, well, now I'm going to find a job as a teacher. You need to be accredited in a different way.
yeah.
So, like, I guess first, what's the thought process of I'm going to shift everything up?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, 8 years working, and 8 years, I did a summer job at this company that I was at, worked 8 years, still at that same company, which is like the least millennial thing to do ever.
Well, I mean, yeah, because I'm now in this boat of trying to figure out what's next, and I had spent 8 years at
Right.
a company, and in my experience, because I've done a lot of networking and meeting with people and trying to figure out what my next step is, and everybody goes, "You've only had the one professional job." It's
Yeah.
well, I mean, okay, I was in retail for 7 years before. I've had 2 jobs in 15 years. Retail for 7, my last job for 8. Like, I'm with you. One of the least millennial things possible.
Yeah. Which is, and I knew that. I was fine with it.
I enjoyed being in one place. Like, I guess, like, I look around, I know people jump from ship to ship, and I've never been a grass is always greener scenario, so like I don't really know if I want to jump, and I don't like the idea of starting over every so often. But I mean, 8 years. One of the things, I mean, I got let go because company was restructuring. They got new leadership, and that's just one of the things that happens. But 8 years, I was comfortable when I was let go. I mean, you're making this decision, and it's 8 years. You must have been like comfortable with where you were.
Absolutely, yeah.
But was there a part of you that where it was unfulfilling, and that's where you're looking for something a little bit more, or
Yeah, there were some changes that had started to happen at my work. The biggest one, that the person who got me connected with the company, one of the founders, him and I worked very closely. We were uh, two of at the initial time, two of three people who worked in our group division. It was such a small company. I was the 11th employee when I started. When I
did they
left,
grow?
they did, yeah. When I left, there was probably, I mean, in Calgary, 30, 40 people.
Wow.
So definitely grew. And actually, by the time I left, got purchased, and so now part of a much bigger company. And so he had started to transition away. He was moving into a different thing, and so I did not, I missed working with him. That was something that brought me a lot of, when a terrible day happened, working with him was something that made it better. And actually, before he fully transitioned into his new role out in a different capacity, he actually unexpectedly passed away, which was a big part of it. He was, my favorite professor, guy I worked with at the company, and obviously, I will never not be grateful for what he did in my life and in the lives of those around us. So, changes, and so I start looking for a different job. Like, you know what? I've never actually done this before. Let's get a new job, right? And then I decided to do that. And again, I work in the oil and gas industry. I do this at like when oil tanked. I decided to start looking for a new job. Not the best of times. And so literally like I started in October and hiring freezes and cuts started in November. And so I'm now thankful. I'm like, okay, you know, I didn't, because you're the last one into that company, first one out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, grateful that I'm here. I still have my very stable, good job, but I still wanted something else, and so I was looking, and I was like, all right, what can I use? Like, sure, not everyone's like, I need a chemical engineer, but almost every company needs someone to do some sort of tech something. And working at a software company, I've done a lot of that, right? I can code, I've done databases, I've done all of these different things as part of it. And so I'm like, all right, let's try to sell myself to some of these other things. And so I'd be looking and I'm like, oh, that's cool. This like nonprofit needs someone to do database work. And so I'd apply to it. And then at the same time, I'd apply to some engineering job. And I'd want the nonprofit job more than the engineering job. Like I'd be like, oh man, I really hope they call me back. And I started thinking, I'm like, well, if I keep wanting these jobs that are not in the field I work in, why am I staying over here?
Sure.
So I stopped applying for everything and started thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I've worked with kids for, the entire time, probably 9-10 years, I'd worked with kids, mostly high school age, volunteer side. So I've been doing that. I still loved math, science, and so often you hear people saying, I hate math. I'm not good at math. Science, I'm not good at it. But like, you don't, I mean, there are some people who are like, I'm not a good reader. I'm not a strong reader. I'm not a fast reader. But like, as we get grown up, for some reason we get this mentality in our head of like, I'm not good. I can't do it. Right? In some
Yeah.
sorts of ways. right?
We're stubborn. When we get older, I think we get more stubborn. So like the things where you're willing to take, I guess when you're younger, you're willing to take a teacher's word for it, right? Like, oh, I'll try that. Absolutely, I'll try that. But once you get out of college, and then you get out of your cocky late 20s, and you're in your 30s, you're like, no, I'm pretty much. I'm the rock I'm going to be. There's no more clay to be molded. I
Right.
am what I am.
Right. Well, one easy way to do that is to fix that is to go back and change careers in your 30s. So, so just having worked with kids, knowing what I know from my own career, being able to just bring a different lens, I was really excited to be able to work with kids, and to be able to just have that positive impact. It was very like, initially, just the most like altruistic of desires, right? I was like, oh, I want to be able to impact people, and as I've gone through, that's definitely still the case. Um, Being able to have that impact, being able to be there for kids, support them in their learning, in their life, to be able to help them become the people that they need to be to grow up. And so that's how I ended up there. And then I started talking to other people, friends, friends who are teachers already, some that work in admin, some that have all these different things. My engineering friends, family, and finding out, how stupid of an idea is this? And no one told me. No, I had one person who told me it was a bad idea, and she later said she was wrong. So, which is great. So, lo and behold, and like you said, I had to go back to school. So 2 years.
And are you still at the engineering? You're still doing engineering during the day, or are you? All right, I'm going to go back to school full time for this.
So one thing that works great is that my work was literally across the street from the university. And so I told them I moved into a different role that I thought could be helpful for them if I could stay on part-time.
Okay.
And so I said, "Hey, what if I did? What if I stayed on part-time and you kept paying me and I kept working here?" And so quit my job, did 20 hours a week part-time while going to school full-time. And the only time that didn't work was when I would do my practicums.
Okay.
So for the first 10 months, I did both still. And that was great. I did like training videos and documentation and things like that for them, which is great. What let me do that was the fact that I was the only person who knew how to work a microphone. This podcasting gig turns out it's super helpful sometimes.
So before you get going any further, like, what's it like going back to school? Because you've been out, at least you've been out of university for, however, a decade almost. You're going back. Um, I'm not really necessarily concerned with the age difference, because obviously at a certain point, like, everybody's in a different spot when they're going to higher education. Some people take more time off, some people go in the military, but like, what's it like to get your head, or is it even hard to get your head around, all right, I've got to study again, and I've got homework again for the first time. Is it an easy transition? Is it, just like, riding a bike, like, oh, I know what this is like?
No, and to go from a degree I'd never done, like I'd done engineering. It is very different to write like a paper. I didn't write papers. I would write lab reports. I would write I wrote reports,
Sure.
which is what engineers do. They're not writing papers. I mean, like, and not that style.
Yeah, you're writing. You're giving me the facts. You're not explaining why necessarily, and you're not defending a position or an argument.
Right. The biggest transition was like, I got in there and they were like, "Yeah, I need to know how you feel in this," and I'm like, Yeah, that's not relevant. Like, I'm not my feelings on the matter do not, like, you make me write. I read a research paper, and
Yep.
then write a reflection on it, and that reflection is, it's research. My
Yeah.
feelings on it are fairly irrelevant, and so that was a change for sure.
Did you? I mean, I guess going back to your first stint in college, you didn't have any or university. I mean, I guess whatever you want to call it, but you didn't have any like electives for like those liberal arts type things, or it had just been so long and it was a rare thing.
Yeah, and it was. And I found loopholes around with some of that, which they closed as soon as I used it. Because I think we had to take three, I believe. I took anthropology, cultural anthropology,
Okay,
and I don't remember if it was world or Canadian history.
and this is the first time around.
This is the first time around, yeah.
Okay.
The second time around, you get 0 electives.
Okay,
It's like you've done all those electives because it's only 2 years. You have to have a degree first to do the 2-year version, and so they're
Okay.
like, you're just doing the education side of it.
all right. And
So-
what was the third in your loophole?
The third one was the loophole. So in the engineering program, you have to take an economics class. Now, there was economics for engineers, but then there was an economics for chemical engineers class, which we had to take. So we didn't take the economics for engineers. So a lot of people did take economics. They would take Econ 201, right?
Yeah.
I figured out that I was allowed to take econ for engineers and have it count as an elective because it was in the economics faculty.
Wow.
So the mandatory course for engineers, I actually used that, and it was almost the identical course that was for chemical engineers. So I took it twice.
Nice.
Crushed it the second time, and they stopped allowing that as soon as, I don't know if they like never realized that that was a thing I was allowed to do, but 2 of us did it, and then they stopped it.
Yeah, I can tell you that I have a 4-year degree in communications. I was in the second class of 4-year degrees that went through that college, and I took one trigonometry class.
Like as your choice elective, or they
No,
were
no,
just-
I took one trigonometry class as my math during the 4 years. I took one biology course, and then as like a math science elective somehow I got away with environmental studies, and those were the 3 math science classes I took over my 4 years.
Well, there you go. You also managed to pull that
Yeah.
off. So
I went the opposite of you.
yeah, exactly.
So you're in this 2-year program. You're getting back into the swing. You're writing about your own, like how you feel about things. During this program, do you have an idea of where you want to end up on a teaching level? Like, early elementary, middle school, high school. Do you have any, I don't know, destination for that at this point?
So when I originally started out, my thought was high school because that's what I'd mostly worked with, and then I ended up taking, and because I'd worked in high school, I was like, you know what I'll do? I'll put myself in the elementary stream so I can give myself that diverse background, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And turns out it's way easier to get a job as a male elementary school teacher. So that's one reason why. But I really enjoyed it. I did not think that I would want to be an elementary school teacher, but it's been fantastic. And so again, I'm not sure how I would. I now know because I did a practicum in there. I now know I could do grade 2. When I started, I was like, oh boy, this is not gonna be good. But it was good. I enjoyed it. I love the kids. And so right now I'm a grade 3, 4 teacher. I'm teaching both of those, and it's fantastic.
Is there anything that you would tell yourself, your past self, I guess? Would you, hey, you should go into teaching a little bit earlier, or anything where like things might have been better if I did this sooner.
I don't know if I would have changed anything because it all led me to here, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So who knows? But I think the biggest like life lesson that I've learned through these last like 4 years of like this process is I was very just a very anxious person about a lot of things. And one of those was money. I was always worried. And I was, like I said, my wife works, I work, we both had full-time jobs. Money was never like an issue. I'm not saying we were, well off by any means, but it wasn't anything that I needed to worry about.
Sure.
And I wish that I had I learned it eventually, but worry less about those things. Take some chances, have some fun. I just wish that I'd kind of learned earlier that money, you know, uh, didn't have to be something I had to worry about. It's obviously you can't just make terrible decisions, but I would always make the safest and smartest financial decision and put off potentially, and I don't know what life could have been, but doing things because they're fun, doing things because they bring you joy, doing things because they're interesting. A lot of that I put off because I was like, you know what, I need to do the smartest thing for me. I need to make sure that I'm secure.
So then I interject and I go, how much of that is the engineer in you for doing for taking the safe route almost instead of, have a little bit of fun? No, you put that away. You
Yeah,
save that.
absolutely. It's the most engineer of reasons for me to do something. I mean, I'm a teacher now, but the engineer side of me is still there. All of those things are still there. So like I'm still a math nerd at heart. Now I just like apply it to sports more so instead of other things.
So I'm gonna turn this into a bit of a like self help. I still have no idea what I want to be. Um, did I mean am I supposed to be, or would you suggest just I look around at the other things I'm doing and enjoy and see what professionalism exists within that, or
Yeah. So I'm gonna preface it, and this is
sure.
a preface that doesn't even need a preface. I'm not an expert. I'm just
No, but you did do something, and I feel like you did something that is almost counterintuitive to the money discussion we just had about being the most engineer thing you could do, and that was you took the left turn.
yeah.
And I guess the I almost want to get into your feelings. Like you took the left turn, and now looking back, it's been fulfilling. But like, do you take time to look back and go like, I'm so glad that it worked out, that I made that decision at that time because of where it led?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of smaller things that led to that happening. I am absolutely very happy of where I ended up, how I ended up, and like I said, uh, all of those small things that led to this point in time, I would not change it at all. But looking back and thinking, um, I mean, I looked at what I enjoy and what I'm good at, and found ways that I can use those together, right? And so that was how I got to the point of teaching, right? In my volunteering, there was an aspect of teaching kids, of doing some work in like life skills kind of stuff. And so I was like, those are things that I'm doing already. I'm literally doing that in my spare time. Maybe if I got paid for that, that would be a good thing. I could do that with my life. So that was kind of, I looked at, what am I spending my time in already? What am I enjoying? How am I enjoying it? How am I doing it? is there a career in any of that? And so looking, for yourself, the things that you enjoy, the things that you do, maybe there is a hobby or an aspect of what you do that you're like, you know what? Like I could do this, could be a thing that I do.
Yeah, I mean, to for the listening audience, because I don't tend to open up, or I haven't opened up very much about this. Um, my job for 8 years was IT, web, and marketing, right? Which are three distinctly different fields. And I was lucky enough to kind of fall on my feet and get a role with an IT company. But I very much miss the web stuff. No, doing my own site's not enough. And I very much miss the marketing. And no, promoting the Palmer brand is not enough. And I had a conversation the other day where I lamented the fact that after work, after hours, whether it was my old job or the one I've got now, I built the blog and now I've got this podcast and I've built this brand. And every time I'm sitting across from somebody, they tell me that because I'm not making any money with the blog and because I'm not making any money with the podcast, that it doesn't matter. And it bothers me, um, like almost to my core, as being offended that I can use my skills to entertain or inform or educate people that I don't know. And I can do it to the best of my ability, and I can continue to read and learn and edit and find ways to do all these things better. And yet, to the outside world, it's a hobby. Tell me what you get paid for. I mean, because that's usually what they tell me. And the more I hear it, the more I go, all right, I really wish I lived in Canada, where universal healthcare would mean if I went out on a limb, I I wouldn't have to worry about what happens if I happen to, break an arm or something. I mean, I'm not really doing anything that would get me there, but I'm not in danger in that way. But like it is a thing where like healthcare is my number one concern. It's if it wasn't, maybe I'd make a go of this. Because to what you're talking about, as far as you enjoy teaching, I enjoy the conversation. I enjoy the research. I enjoy reaching out to people. Uh, there's very little bit of this entire Palmer persona that I don't absolutely love. And I love helping people. I mean, that's the other part that kind of gets maybe a backseat because I launched my own show is, and the Wicked Theory podcast is on break, and I'm not behind the scenes of 7 Days a Geek anymore. And the Stranger Cons is gone, and all of these shows that I was really helping behind the scenes are on break or gone, or in a different form, or I enjoy helping people, and there's no money in that from the skill set I have. Like Carl, does the Fourth Line podcast need some help with marketing? We could all use help with marketing, but you can't help me pay my mortgage and healthcare costs. Like that's just not a plausibility at the moment. But the more people tell me that what I'm doing doesn't matter, the more I feel like it does. That's my takeaway from all of this, right? Like I just go like, this can't be, I mean, it's fulfilling to me on a creative level, but it's fulfilling to me on a personal level too, because I get to make friendships and I get to make relationships and I get to meet people. And, you know, within my community, within the circle and the community I want to build as listenership for this show and readership for my blog, I'm not looking for negativity. I'm trying to, if I don't write negative reviews because I don't want to have people read that.
Right. Yeah.
So this is what I want to build. And it's funny, I had lunch with my mother a couple weeks ago, and I literally went on a tirade in a restaurant, and my mother agrees with everything I said, but I was basically like, listen, people need to stop looking at me like I'm going to help them with marketing from a standpoint of what's my ROI. They need to start looking at me as that's a guy who can help me build a community. Well, why would I spend money building a community? Okay. Because my mother worked with her own business doing internal marketing, but she knows the business side of things to ask me, why should anybody care about community? And I said, the only thing I knew to be like the most true statement, which is local comic book stores, local gaming stores, and many times they overlap. They're the reason that you want to build community. Because there isn't anyone with a pull list at a local comic book store that couldn't get their comics cheaper on Amazon or online somewhere else.
Yeah.
So why do they bother to go through the local comic book store? Well, they go through the local comic book store because it's a community, and they want to support the place that supports their community.
Mm. Yeah.
And those are the kind of people you want patronizing your business and utilizing your services. But there's very little money in that. You know, local gaming stores, local comic stores are always struggling because those communities are tough. But the people that are a part of those communities, they're a part of something, and they spend a little bit extra for that community. People need that. But how do you sell that? And how do I sell that as one guy who's still trying to, pay his mortgage?
Right.
And get healthcare? Like, that's hard. And these are the things I struggle with. And yeah, I can see well, start your own business then. Well, I have my own business, but it's not that simple. I don't know. I have all these options, right? I have these skills. I really don't know where I'm going to end up. I feel like there's a part of me that feels like it's just going to fall into place if I just keep talking to enough people. And it's whether it's on this podcast, whether it's having coffee with somebody, or just meeting somebody randomly at a meeting. Like, I feel like it's going to happen, and I don't know if that makes me an optimist or a crazy person. I'm not sure what that makes me, but
yeah, I don't think it makes you a crazy person at all. I think it certainly an optimist, and I think we can all use some optimism, right? But when in hearing you talk about what you love, right? Like hearing that passion in what you have, I think there's definitely going to be a thing, and I think you're closer to that solution than you think you might be, because in hearing that you know what you like, because at first you started talking about the podcast and the blog and all those things, but like you very quickly brought that back to community and marketing.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, okay, that's what you enjoy about what you do, right? Which is what I love about the podcasting gig as well, is the community, right? There are many ways that I could market the show and market our writing and all those things and get bigger than what we are. There's a lot of them. Some of them with different ways that I don't necessarily agree with. But I want to build that community, and I want people who want to be part of it. And that's what gets you people who are on your side and doing things and supporting each other and helping, like you have for so many years with so many people. And so I think doing that, right, there's something there where you will find something, whether it be behind the scenes like you've done for so many people for so long, doing that help, because trust me, there's a big need in the world for people who will help just for the sake of being like, I enjoyed that I made that person's day better. Because there's so many people that are doing it just because, like, I want to be the person. I want to be the guy. right?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's the biggest adjustment for the Palmer Files is I never wanted to be the front man. Like uh I I I grew up playing instruments, right? I played the tenor saxophone, which means I got classified as the low brass section. And before I learned to play guitar, I learned to play bass. Like I want to be behind. I don't want to be the lead. And I have no problem doing this, and I'm kind of turning around on the fact that I actually do enjoy this, but I feel like I get more done and I have more, I don't know, skills for the behind the scenes gig. And yeah, we'll see. Because the other part is, this is talking to you about this. Obviously, I went on that rant about community with my mom, and like every time I'd have this conversation, or I say these things out loud, the thesis statement gets more succinct and stronger. I just need to keep having these conversations, and eventually, at the very least, I'll have a very very poignant blog post or podcast episode, or
You'll have narrowed it down to one real succinct tweet.
Ooh, 100. Ooh, that I don't know. A tweet might be much for that, but it's possible. I might have to use some ampersands instead of ands to save on characters.
Whatever it takes. But at the same time, I've done the same thing, because people ask, well, why did you switch? And I've worked on getting it down to like the shortest story possible. And then along comes Palmer. He's like, hey, want to talk about this for an hour? Like, you know what? I've been really trying to compact this. Sure, let's dive into it.
I agree with Carl at the end there. I am probably closer than I think, but it doesn't mean I have the answers or that I'm nearing the end of my journey, but I am well on my way. This episode on a whole makes me think of Bob Dylan's autobiography Chronicles, which I am currently reading. Dylan writes, "There was a lot of halting and waiting, little acknowledgement, little or affirmation, but sometimes all it takes is a wink or a nod from some unexpected place to vary the tedium of a baffling existence." This conversation with Carl was one of those nods. I know that now, having been a part of it and having listened back to it as I ran through post-production, but that still doesn't help me with direction, and whether I'm 2 months, 2 years, or even 2 days away from figuring it out, winks and nods from those I respect will always assist me. And I don't mean to talk about this in a completely singular way either. It just makes it easier to talk about. But everything from either my side of the conversation or Carl's side is applicable to almost anyone depending on your situation. For Carl's part, I find his story courageous. Not only his decision-making and thought process, but it took some time, so his follow-through as well. I also find it a bit righteous and noble, two descriptors that don't get much use these days. Sure, it's a win-win, but for a professional, any professional, to give up their career to teach, that's not capitalistic unless there's more money in it, and then it's not righteous or noble. Now, I'd like to go back to my rant about what I do in my spare time with another Dylan quote from the book about recognition. Sometimes that's all it takes. The kind of recognition that comes when you're doing the thing for the thing's sake and you're onto something. It's just that nobody recognizes it yet. Dylan's correct on this account, and as all of my previous guests, Carl included, can tell you, this is supremely and irrevocably tied to podcasting, which makes it no different than blogging in a sense as well. We toil away at keyboards and on microphones to create this content, and then we set it adrift on the internet, which is as accessible now as your nearest pocket. And occasionally, the veterans more occasionally than the newbies, check our statistics. We see you out there consuming our wares, either enjoying our content or laughing at us, but all in silence. And if any of us were uncomfortable with the "it's just that nobody recognizes it yet" part, we wouldn't be doing it. Look, earlier in the episode I said what I said about hobbies. I'm not putting down video games or watching whatever streaming service of the month you've got downloading into your current screen, but in some way we all have hobbies that add skills to our lives, professional or otherwise. I'm just saying that I'm not doing this for any other reason other than to create something that maybe someone else will enjoy, but along the way, I'm doing it for me, and that's enough. Yet those skills are transferable, and that should be relevant no matter how much money, if any, is being made. But enough of this. It's time to move on. So, as my good friend Bill Sweeney would say, enough of you. Which reminds me, his show, the Wicked Theory Podcast, is back, people. Please check him out. He's gone to a fortnightly release schedule as well, but it's opposite this show, so you can check out him plus a guest having lighthearted conversations and doing bits for the fun of it. So, what did you think of Carl's story, and do you know of any job openings in my area or remote positions? Tweet or email the show to let me know. Thanks for listening to The Palmer Files, Episode 6. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. Let me know what you think. You can tweet the podcast at The Palmer Files, myself at Agent Palmer, and reach this week's guest, Carl, at Fourth Line Podcast. The show email is thePalmerFiles@gmail.com, and don't forget to visit the Fourth Line hockey website, thefourthlinepodcast.com, and see what I've got going on agentpalmer.com. You can also hear more of me in the meantime on Our Liner Notes, a musical conversation podcast with host Chris Meyer, and my new gig as co-host of the Podcast Digest with Dan Lizette. Okay, Carl, do you have one final question for me?
Yes. So we've talked many a times throughout the years. I rarely get to see your face, and I do not recall that this is the setting that I looked at this last time. But I've been looking at this collection of pictures, magnets, etc. that you have sitting over here on the side.
Sure.
What? So we've got the Bethlehem steel magnet. We got our full fight. We got this cow magnet. What's that black thing that all of them are holding up?
Okay, so this right here is a thing that says Agent Palmer. And it's on that black paper that has like the colors behind it, and you scratch off the black.
Okay.
And the colors appear. That was given to me by one of Grant Markham's kids at the Podtoberfest in 2016 when I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
I love it.
And it has a prominent place in my background right now. And I want to tell you something about this background. Obviously, over my left shoulder are the famous pink curtains, or infamous pink curtains from the Seven Dag stuff. But I've been thinking about potentially changing my office around to put a bookcase behind me, where, like, if I was on a sports show, there'd be like a hockey helmet and a football helmet and like a baseball hat behind me.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking of what would, if I had the bookcase behind me, what would I put? I think some of the things that are already there are pretty representative. I mean, anybody who's listened,
you're well on your way.
I mean, anybody who listened to the last episode, this, which you can't see very well, is a chicken sandwich pack insert that would go in front of a light fixture from Arthur Treacher's. Okay. This is a Think Geek monkey. Rest in peace, Think Geek. Now that you're owned by GameStop or whatever.
Is that what happened to them?
Yeah, that's what happened.
Oh.
And then Bethlehem Steel is well, I live near Bethlehem, and Bethlehem Steel made the steel most famously for the Golden Gate Bridge. But we had in the early 1900s, Bethlehem Steel had a soccer club that did very well, and recently they got the Philadelphia Union had a minor league of sorts here that was the Bethlehem Steel Football Club again. So that was
Nice.
for that. And the rest is just like a fake backstage pass for Def Leppard's Hysteria tour and a print of Brooks Robinson signed. I don't think it was actually signed by him. And I believe. Oh, and on right here on the front of this file cabinet is a championship banner from the last time the Orioles won the World Series in 1983.
I appreciate the tour. You're very well on your way. I moved this summer and I was like, I should do that. And the view you currently have is the most boring of views. I'll move out of the way. I've got a
we
window.
gotta add some stuff. Yeah.
I've got a window with some pillows over there. 2 of them are generic, and one of them is a Jeff Gordon pillow. One of 2 Jeff Gordon pillows I have in this room, and a couch, and that's it. It used to be that you'd look at this closet, which I've now shut the door on.
Yep.
That's about it.
Yeah, I really think I want like that aesthetic of like, here are my books or what have you. Before I leave you, what the most unfortunate thing I think is that on the bookcase I'm looking at behind my computer that you're on, I have a slightly disassembled hard drive where I can see the spinning disc. And I would love to put that behind me, but I worry about what the light from the computer will look like in the spinning disc of an old hard drive, and like, would that distract people, and what would that do?
I think it'd be good. Yeah, I think having, are you distracted by it?
I look at it occasionally, and then because of the mirror effect, I'm like, those are cords hanging off the other side of my desk. Yes, absolutely. That's what those are.
Yeah. No, I think that'd be great. I fully support that decision.
I'm working on it.
Awesome.